And now, I'm presenting Professor Rob Brennar at Queen Mary University of London to give his speech, Evidence-Based HR.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for hanging around for this session. So in the next 25 minutes, I want to talk a bit about what evidence-based practice is, what it means in HR, a bit about how you do it and why you should. Firstly, though, I would like to spend maybe just a minute. Put your hand up if you've heard of evidence-based HR before today. Any of you heard of it? So 2 or 3. Okay, so you might not know what it is, but write down now what you think evidence-based HR means. Okay, write it down. I'll just give you 1 minute. Try and define it. Okay, got about another 10 seconds if you are writing it down. Okay, thank you for doing that. We'll come back and look at your answer compared to another answer in a short while, just to see how similar your answer is. So, these are my assumptions. My assumptions are that beyond transactional stuff like payroll, what HR professionals should do are 2 things. 1 is stuff that addresses important business problems. Not no problems, not silly problems, not trivial problems, but important problems. The second thing I think HR people should do is do stuff that's more likely to work. Do you agree? Yeah, right? So, if you agree, and it's very hard to disagree, then the rest of my talk is based on these 2 premises. Evidence-based practice is about doing what is important and for the business and doing what is more likely to work. That's what evidence-based practice is for. So where does it come from? So evidence-based practice, it's an elevator pitch. Basically, the idea is that decisions about what a problem is and what a solution might be should be based on the best available evidence. And for us in HR, that means at least 4 sources of evidence. The first is scientific findings, the stuff that's produced in universities like this about HR. That's one source. The second source is data from the organization, the kind of stuff you do in data analytics. The third source is your professional expertise and experience as an HR professional. The fourth source is the concerns and perceptions of your stakeholders, which typically are employees, managers, society, and so forth. So that's really what it is. So the point is everybody uses evidence, all practitioners use evidence, but there's 2 problems. Typically, practitioners don't use enough different sources or types of evidence, and typically they don't look at the quality or the trustworthiness of that evidence. So essentially, evidence-based practice is being designed to try and fix or help with those 2 problems. And of course, the point is we always use evidence. So evidence-based practice isn't about using evidence. You can't make a decision without using evidence. So that's not really the issue. Where did it come from? Evidence-based practice is a thing. I didn't make it up. The Centre for Evidence-Based Management did not make up this idea. It actually comes from medicine. And these are roughly the dates where these different professions started using the term evidence-based. Each of these professions has a Centre for Evidence-Based Practice. This, for example, is the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford. This is a Centre for Evidence-Based Policing. Not criminal evidence, but the idea that if you're a police officer, or if we were police officers and we wanted to fix some kind of crime, what's the evidence about what may fix it better than other kinds of evidence? This is evidence-based policy making. This is from the United States. So Barack Obama, the previous president of the United States, was very keen on evidence-based policy making. However, many people feel the current president of the United States is maybe not so interested in evidence-based practice. Conservation, education, agriculture, mentoring, and more recently the Centre for Evidence-Based Management. So it's a thing, it's a way of thinking across a whole range of professions about how you do your work. The CIPD, which is a UK professional body for HR practitioners, the CIPD has recently got into evidence-based practice, writing these two publications just a year and a half ago. Peter Cheese, who's the CEO of CIPD, said very recently, just a few months ago, he says there's a whole movement around evidence-based management, not just in HR. If we're honest about it, we've all tended to follow fads and trends, and we need to ask where the evidence is and whether we understand what we want to achieve and how the interventions we're making are helping to drive them. So some HR professional bodies are starting to pick up on this very, very recently as an idea. This is from a blog post by Shawna Walters from SHRM, which is the US organization for HR. Again, very recently, the same month and year, in fact, picking up this idea. What is it? Now, I'd like to look back at your definition of evidence-based practice. It's the conscientious, which means you try, it's the explicit, which means you make it clear, and it's the judicious, which means you judge the quality of use of the evidence from multiple sources to make a decision both about a problem and a solution. So it's about the process. It's not about certainties. It's not saying this will work. It's about probabilities and likelihoods. Say not about certainties. It's about reducing uncertainty. So this isn't a magic formula that's going to give you the answer. That's not the point of evidence-based practice. The point of evidence-based practice is to make a better informed decision. And that's kind of it. That's the point. So if you look at your definition, I don't know what you wrote down right at the beginning of the session, but my guess is it probably wasn't much like that. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because one challenge in HR is when I talk to HR practitioners, they often say, well, I am evidence-based, I'm doing it already. And you kind of go, well, you're probably doing a bit of it, but you're not doing all of it. Sure, you look at evidence, but that's not the same as evidence-based practice. So looking at evidence-based practice, this is an infographic actually produced by CIPD. Here's the 4 sources of evidence I mentioned. Here's the definition, and it involves 6 steps, where you ask a question, you acquire the evidence, so you acquire it, you critically appraise it, step 3 for its quality and trustworthiness, you aggregate it, you pull it together, you apply it, and then you assess it. And this is all about increasing the likelihood of a favourable outcome. So again, it's not a guaranteed outcome, it's the likelihood. This is an example. Put your hand up if you've heard of employee engagement. Does anyone know what it is? No, nobody knows what it is. It doesn't mean anything. But it means something a bit like commitment, something a bit like satisfaction, something a bit like identification. It's always measured, or nearly always measured, using a survey. Now imagine in your HR practice, you're an HR practitioner in your department, in your organisation. These are just some of the books you can get, just to show how popular it is. Employee engagement for dummies, employee engagement for everyone, not just for dummies, for everyone. Employee engagement 2.0, because you know if you put 2.0 at the end of something, it's better than the thing that didn't have 2.0. And if you can keep adding numbers, the better and better it gets. Employee engagement mindset, magic, and lessons from Disney about engagement and the truth about engagement. Typically, this is the problem practitioners are faced with. They are told that engagement is too low and they have to do something about engagement. You must improve engagement. Some of you who put your hand up if you measure engagement in your organisation. Okay, so those of you who measure it will probably know it's never too high, it's never just right, it's always too low, which is a clue that it's a very problematic and silly concept. But anyway, supposing you had this issue, you've got to try and improve it. What are the kinds of questions you would ask as an HR team from an evidence-based perspective? The first question you'd ask, and going back to these 4 sources of evidence, is you'd look at your own expertise. You'd ask these kinds of questions. Firstly, you always start off with a problem. You always try and identify the problem. You'd say, what do we think about low employee engagement? Do we think it's low? Why do we think it's low? What's our experience of this? In my profession, what do we think are the causes and consequences? And if you think it's a problem, you then look to your expertise to try and address solutions. What do we think is likely to work? What do we think is going on here? Your professional expertise is part of it. However, for any source of evidence, the key questions are, is this evidence relevant and is it trustworthy? Your professional expertise may be really relevant and really trustworthy, or it may be terrible. And that is true of any source of evidence, but you have to make a judgment. That's the first source. The second source is organisational data. What is the level of engagement? Are there pattern or trends in engagement? Can you see links between other things? Do data show that how low employee engagement is causing problems? Because again, I don't know about the people here, but my experience of asking HR managers and practitioners, I say to them, how do you know low engagement is a problem? And typically, they don't know. They don't know because they haven't linked it to any important outcomes, but maybe you have. Maybe you do know it's a problem. If you think it is a problem, what might be the solutions be? What are you already doing to help employee engagement? What is happening that might be affecting it? Are there links between engagement and department or engagement and location that might give you a clue about how you can fix this problem of low engagement? And again, is that evidence relevant and trustworthy? Thirdly, the scientific literature. If you go to academic journals, if you look at the science, what does the science tell us are typical levels of engagement? What does systematic reviewed evidence say are the problems with low engagement? Are there lots and lots of studies that show if engagement goes up, performance goes up, and that if engagement goes down, say performance goes down? Are there 1 study, 10 studies? Are they good studies, bad studies? What is the scientific evidence? And if you think it's still a problem, then again, what does scientific evidence say are the interventions that might work to fix it? So you ask questions again of the scientific evidence and again saying, is it relevant and trustworthy? The fourth source, stakeholders. You ask stakeholders what they think. What do they think about the problem? Do your customers or clients see a problem with low engagement? Do your managers see a problem with low engagement? Or is it just your survey? Or is it everything that sees a problem? And if there is a problem, similarly, what do your customers, clients, stakeholders, employees think about solutions? So that's the basic process. For any particular kind of issue, you gather evidence from those 4 sources about both the problem, and if there is a problem, and there may not be, the potential solution. So, why does HR need evidence-based practice? Thinking about what you know, typically about HR, how HR is practiced, how evidence-based, given the definition and given that example, how evidence-based is HR? Put your hand up if you think it's 10 out of 10. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, yeah, okay, 1, yeah. So the sort of median responses is normally kind of 3 or 4. So as a profession, HR is not particularly evidence-based. It is not unusual. Medicine is not that evidence-based, but it's trying. Policing is not that evidence-based. Education is not, but it's sort of trying to do it. So evidence-based practice is not typical of what HR does. Okay, so this is the huge challenge of evidence-based practice. It makes sense. Nobody says evidence-based practice is stupid. Nobody says it's a waste of time collecting evidence. Everyone agrees it's in principle a good idea. But what is surprising is that it's very hard to do. One way of dealing with this is to understand some of the barriers. So now I want to talk a bit about what are the barriers, what are the things that get in the way of practitioners being evidence-based? What are they? Well, there's lots and lots. I'm only going to talk about these, but there's lots and lots of things that get in the way of any HR manager who wants to be evidence-based, an HR team that wants to be evidence-based. These are things that stop them doing it. And understanding some of these can help you, I think, start to become a bit more evidence-based. The first barrier is misconceptions. People have strange ideas about what evidence-based practice is. Firstly, sometimes practitioners think it means they can't use their experience. I've already said it does. You have to use your experience. It doesn't mean that. Of course you use your experience. Some people think evidence is about the truth and it's about proof. No, evidence isn't about the truth. Evidence is just data, whether it's from science or from your own organizational data. Evidence is not about the truth. The truth is something different. The truth is aesthetic. The truth is something else, is what you feel. Similarly, evidence is not about proof. You cannot prove things collecting data. You can get probabilities and likelihoods. The only way you can prove things, the only environment you can prove things, is things like maths or algebra or logic. That's where you can prove things, not with data. So this isn't about trying to prove anything. It's not about trying to find the truth. It's about trying to make a better informed decision. So it's just not relevant to the concept. It's not also about making perfectly informed decisions. It's simply about making better informed decisions. There's not some perfect state of evidence-based practice. There isn't. It's just trying to make better informed decisions. And finally, gathering the evidence will give you the answer. Sometimes people feel if I go across these 4 sources, I pull all the evidence together, I will get the answer. And of course, guess what happens? You don't get the answer because the problem isn't the problem you thought it was. And there's 7 answers instead of 3 answers. That's a success. That's not a defeat. That means you have a better understanding of the problem and a better understanding of the solutions. So typically, in any field, the more we find out, the more we realize you don't know stuff. Second barrier is cognitive biases. I guess many of you have heard of System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is very fast, intuitive, emotional. It requires very little effort. If you see something and say, wow, that's cool, that's your System 1. If you see something and go, God, I hate that, that's your System 1. You should never make an HR decision on the basis that something is cool, because that's a terrible way to make decisions. So System 2 is slow, it's harder to do it, but the problem is we're kind of hardwired to make these fast, quick, snap, intuitive decisions. There's lots and lots of visual illusions that draw into your System 1. This is one of them. So do these lines look straight? Do they look parallel, or do they look kind of wonky? What do you think? They look kind of wonky, but you know this is a trick question, so you know they're straight. How would you find out if these lines are actually parallel? How would you find out? You'd measure it, and actually, if you want to come and stand here, though it's difficult, if you look this way, you can actually see they're parallel. This is one of the key lessons of evidence-based practice. Things look away, they look like something, but it may be an illusion. You need to find out, you need to measure, you need to check it out. This is another one. All these elephants are the same size, but of course the one at the front looks bigger. How are you going to do it? You're going to measure it and check it out. Here's another possible illusion. Is this real or is this an illusion? You need to check it out. It's a model of engagement. Does engagement lead to all these things? Is it an illusion or is it real? You need to find out. Similarly, are these separate circles or are they going into each other like this? They look like they're going into each other, but you can check it out. If you follow one around, you'll see they're not connected at all. It's another illusion. Oh, look, here's another potential illusion. It's talent management. Is this an illusion? Does this stuff really lead to this stuff? If you do this stuff, does it really cause this? Does this stuff really cause that? Is it an illusion? Well, you have to check it out. You can't just believe what you see. Okay, what did it say in that triangle? Shout it out. What did it say in the triangle? Say it again. Paris in the spring. Are you sure? You're really sure? Look at it again. What did it say? Look again. Yeah, it's got 2 thes. Okay, that's your System 1. You just read it, and you wouldn't be able to read without your System 1. But these things are great. So System 1 is great for some things, terrible for other things. Great for reading, terrible for making complicated decisions. This is quite interesting. So I wanted to look at this square here and this square there. Do they look like different colours? Yeah, they look like different colours. If you take out all the context, take out all the background, do they look different now? No, they look the same. They look exactly the same. And you can, if you take it out bit by bit, if you take out some context, take out a bit more context, take out even more context and put them together, you can see they're the same. But it looks different. So the point about cognitive biases is we all have them. The most important bias is that we think we don't have any biases, a meta-cognitive bias. But we all have biases, which is why, as an HR manager, if you see stuff, you should not believe it. Check it out, measure it, look at the assumptions. And that's what all these illusions are telling you. Things get in the way. I won't talk about the table one now. This question, I'd like you to read it, and I'll get an answer from you in about 10 seconds. Okay, if you've seen this before, you're not allowed to answer. Okay? If you haven't seen it before, who thinks the correct answer is 10p? Put your hand up. 10 cents. Put your hand up if you think it's 10 cents. Does anyone else want to give a different answer? Come on, you're all very smart people. You can't work this out? Yeah, what do you want to say? 5 cents? 5? Okay, so who else thinks it's 5? 2 people think it's 3, 4, 5 people think it's 5. 1 person thinks it's 10. What do the rest of you think? Are you just not going to put your hand up? Okay, that's fine. The correct answer is 5 pence. The correct answer is 5 cents. Thank you very much. Thank you. But nearly everybody says 10. 10 is wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. 10 is wrong, okay? But the reason you say 10 is bat and ball, £1 10 pence, €1 10 cents. What wants to kind of pop out is 10. So in effect, what you people argue is you're answering a slightly different question. Yeah, most people get this wrong. I got it wrong the first time I saw it. And in fact, sometimes now I still think secretly it is 10 cents. But I know it isn't. But yeah, it's another example. There's lots of other biases. This is from Wikipedia. This is a sort of close-up of something, just to show there's all these kinds of biases. So that's the second thing that gets in the way. The third thing that gets in the way is strong and wrong beliefs. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. You may not be certain of the answer, but I'd like you to try and have a guess. If you've really got no idea, then don't answer. But yeah, so the idea of strong and wrong beliefs is that it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And similarly, Stephen Hawking saying the same thing, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. In other words, it's fine to not know stuff. To say I don't know is good because it means you're going to find out. If you say I know, I think I know, and you're wrong, that's a problem. So this question, what's happened to average job tenure, the amount of time people stay with an employer in the past 10 years? I'm afraid this is US and UK data, but who thinks people are spending more time on average with their employer? So it's gone up. Who thinks it's gone up? Okay, who thinks it's gone down? People spending less time? Who thinks it's about the same? Okay, so most people thought it's gone down, and in general, most people do. So this is a study again in the UK that says the average time people spend with an employer did not shift greatly between the mid-70s to mid-2000s. Average job tenure appears to have increased slightly in recent years. In other words, job tenure has gone up. Most HR practitioners believe it's gone down. This is from the US. This is median job tenure over 10 years, and this is just extending it to 2016. And basically, it stayed the same, and if anything, has gone up a bit. Job satisfaction. Again, US and UK. Who thinks job satisfaction is going up? National level, say in the UK and US. Anyone think people are more satisfied with their jobs? Anybody thinks people are less satisfied? Yeah, most of you. Who thinks it's about the same? Okay, so this is the US, so this is the UK. And yes, of course there are fluctuations, but the yellow line is the average, and basically it hasn't changed very much. This is the US, going back to 1989, looking at completely satisfied and somewhat satisfied, again, national level data. And essentially, it depends which column you looked at, but essentially it hasn't really changed very much. So similarly also, if you look at percentage of people in permanent workforce in the UK again, most people assume permanent employment has declined, gig economy, more people doing that stuff. But in fact, over 20 years, the percentage of permanent employees in the UK is about the same. It hasn't really shifted. So all these assumptions we make about things changing, we might make as HR practitioners, if we believe them, they could really affect things like the way we recruit, the way we retention people. We might be concerned to improve job satisfaction, but maybe there's not a problem in that it's remaining quite stable. That's the third barrier. Fourth barrier is management fads and fashions, and I think there's plenty of these. As Peter Cheese, the CEO of CIPD, said, I think there are plenty of fads and fashions in HR. These are examples not just from HR, re-engineering, in search of excellence, total quality management, the war for talent, lean, etc. And people have got pretty interested in these management fads and fashions because it seems that those of you, for example, who do work in HR and have worked in HR for 15 years or more will know that these things come in and out, new idea, everybody jumps on it. 2 years later, 3 years later, we drop it and pick up the next new, shiny, exciting thing. We drop that, pick up the next thing. And in general, this is regarded as quite unhelpful because they get in the way of clear thinking. And they also encourage what's called solutioneering. You identify a problem by the absence of a solution. So the problem is our managers are not emotionally intelligent enough. No, that's not a problem. The problem might be everybody hates your managers. The problem might be your managers are horrible. It's not about emotional intelligence. Similarly, the problem is our engagement scores are low. No, that isn't a problem. The problem might be turnover. The problem might be absence. That's the problem, not engagement scores. So encourage this thing called solutioneering. And generally, they may be effective, but they're not really panaceas. They can be harmful, and they're over-applied. So why do people go with fads and fashions? Well, I think it's because they're buzzy and exciting. This is how you can spot one. They appeal to system one thinking. They're cool. There's often massive claims made about them with almost no evidence. It's all good. They often involve gurus and superstars. They're presented as universal panaceas, and they use lots of anecdotes from big companies that you can never verify. You can never find out if they're true. And they involve new words which don't seem to describe anything new. So metrics instead of measures, analytics instead of analysis, big data instead of just data, which is what almost everybody has. And people, talent, etc., etc. These are ways of spotting fads. Now, of course, we go with it because it's cool. It's system one. Everyone is doing it. It's defensive. If you're an HR director wondering what to do about motivation, you could do evidence-based practice, or you could just take the latest thing and do that because everybody's doing it. It's defensive. It means you can't kind of get into trouble. People think the latest thing is the best thing. If others are doing it, then surely it works. And also less thinking is required as well. Right. So far, I've talked about some of the problems. I've talked about HR's profession is not very evidence-based, and I've talked about some of the barriers. So what can we do about it? So I'm just going to conclude here. Firstly, I think we could spend much more time getting evidence about real problems. Anecdotally, my experience of working with HR practitioners and professionals is that they do lots of stuff. If I ask them, what is the problem that this is going to fix, typically they don't know. It's just something they're doing. We need to have onboarding. Why? Because we need onboarding. Because it's good. Why? We need to do it. Why? And typically there's not much of an answer. It's just stuff that people do. We need to ask the question why a lot. Why are we doing stuff? And more humility and honesty about what we know and what we actually don't know. I think it's an important starting point. Where evidence is poor, we need to do more evaluations. And also say less solutioneering, less solutions in search of problems, a bit more skepticism about some of the fads and fashions that are thrown at HR practitioners by consultancies and other organisations, and also explicitly commit to and trying to use something like an evidence-based model. Try and say, let's try and make some big decisions using this model. See if we think it's better. See what we learn by doing it. Why can you do evidence-based practice? Well, I said right at the beginning, if you believe that HR practitioners should do what's important for the business, and if you believe HR practitioners should do what is more likely to work, I don't know another way of doing it. How else do you do it apart from looking at evidence? Thank you very much.